What were the standout fantasy football picks for redraft leagues and dynasty from rounds 2 and 3 of the 2024 NFL draft? It's time to find out right here and right now as we begin another edition and another week of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. If you go there, you can check out the grades for all the 1, 2, and 3 round picks there in the 2024 NFL draft, as well as grades for every single team 1 through 32. Check it out there at sportingnews.com. Today, we're going to focus the show looking at the second and third round picks, all offensive skill players, and what their fantasy football outlook is, whether you're looking for redraft leagues or dynasty. We'll get into that on today's show. My co-host, Michelle, is out today, but she'll be back for our next show. So I'm flying solo today. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it makes me a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly game. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, we'll go down in order of how they were selected in the draft. We had a draft pick immediately in the second round at 33 overall. That has a lot of intrigue for fantasy in redraft. That's Keon Coleman, the wide receiver of Florida State, started his career at Michigan State. He ends up as the Bills' new probable outside number 1 receiver here, replacing Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis is gone. They have Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, and Dalton Kincaid behind this receiver on the depth chart. So Keon Coleman's in a lot of places to succeed here on this offense. He can line up anywhere. This is a team that has a ridiculous amount of vacated targets. So he is looking great. I mean, almost an opportunity to eat up all those Stephon Diggs targets. It's going to be spread around a little bit. I think you'll see a bigger role for Kincaid. Dawson Knox should be involved as well as the second tight end. Shakir, however, projects more as an inside slot, but I think he'll play on the outside with Samuel there and be the short area guy that they've had before with Isaiah McKenzie. So Samuel and Shakir will be the other receivers here, but the Bills passed on all their receiving options in the first round, but they ended up with a really good receiver. He's tough, he's strong, he's underrated with his big playability, but he's a little like Stephon Diggs. He's going to be reliable and get open all over the field. Coleman's a very technically sound route runner, and his speed underwhelmed a little bit at the combine, but he's got everything it takes to be a number 1 outside receiver. So this is a really good landing spot. Other than Marvin Harrison Jr., I think this is the best. I think you do have some upside with Malik Neighbors there as well with the Giants, but Rome Odunze goes to a real crowd here, and I think Coleman is in a better situation than Odunze is with the Bears on the Bills. So I'm going to draft him. I think he has wide receiver 3 potential on the low end. We saw that with Rashee Rice filling in for the Chiefs last year. He was their best receiver as a rookie. He got to wide receiver 3, but he's got higher status than that. I think you could look at top 24 wide receiver 2 for Keon Coleman as well. The Chargers also passed on a wide receiver in the first round. They went with Joe Alt, the offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, to keep protecting Justin Herbert better. Well, they got Herbert a couple weapons here later in the draft. The first one was Ladd McConkey. They also added Brendan Rice later as a bit of a flyer, as a big play threat outside. But Ladd McConkey, essentially, this is the team with the most vacant targets. When you look at Austin Eckler gone, he was up there with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Gerald Everett. So this team had the most vacant targets. The Bills were right behind them. And McConkey is going to step in. He probably will play the slot because you look at Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson, they're more outside receivers. So when you look at McConkey, he should be in the top 3. And they didn't really upgrade tight end all that much. They still have Donald Parham Jr. They're hanging around. But I just look at this team. They're going to be limited passing volume. It's going to go down. This is a 60% plus passing team from last year. But keep in mind, a couple years ago, you had a Ravens team throw like 52% of the time. So there's going to be 10% less passing here with Greg Roman That's been his history. That's why they didn't go nuts investing on wide receiver. That's why they cleaned house with Allen and Williams. So McConkey can get open. He's going to get there all over the field. I think he's more appealing in PPR and half-point PPR. I don't know if he's going to get it done with the big plays. That's kind of his limitation, but he can score touchdowns. We've seen Keenan Allen get the numbers as well without being a big touchdown scorer. So McConkey essentially is your Allen replacement. Again, Johnson has a lot to prove here. Josh Palmer's just a guy. He's going to be valuable all over the field here for Herbert, but McConkey is also very sound, can route run well, and will be open all over the field. So I love this pick here for the Chargers. And again, he's going to get high volume right away from Justin Herbert by default, and you're going to target him as well as a wide receiver 3. It's offense. So landing spot, location is important. Talent is there as well. And McConkey and Coleman kind of mix those things really well. Now, Jalen Polk, I really liked behind Rome Odunze. They also had Jalen McMillan get drafted as a slot receiver for the Buccaneers, the Washington Huskies program. 3 wide receivers. Jalen Polk is in a really good spot. He's a tough, strong wide receiver, and I think they need more of someone outside. So he has a chance to win that job. You have Kendrick Bourne at one spot, Demario Douglas holding the slot right now. I think it's going to be a fight here for Javon Baker to get on the field because you got a couple of slot options there, not only Douglas, but Juju Smith-Schuster. But outside, Devontae Parker's not there. So some opportunities here with Drake May. You also have to worry about Hunter Henry. I wouldn't go nuts here with the targeting of this player, but keep in mind, watch how things kind of play out in training camp, whether it's rookie on rookie connection that develops with Drake May and they go in a different direction, see how it plays out with Joe Milton. If they end up keeping Bailey Zappi and Polk carves out a big role in this new Alex Van Pelt offense, we're going to watch it. But yeah, I would say right now, I wouldn't draft him higher than a wide receiver 5. It's just too many things going on in New England. It's actually a bit of a crowd that's got similar skill sets, a run-heavy offense, all those things. So Coleman and McConkey were really high on them, but 3 picks later, I think Polk was a bit of a reach, and the Patriots didn't end up with an alpha here, such as maybe a Troy Franklin would have been a better pick for them here. But Jalen Polk, 37, again, lukewarm. I wouldn't draft him too high, but watch it. Wide receiver 5 is definitely a good stash later in redraft. I think in Dynasty, he's got a way more value where I think Coleman, McConkey are going to have more immediate impact. Then we had our first running back off the board. He went at 46 overall to the Panthers. This was a bit of a surprise. We saw the Chiefs and Buccaneers and especially the Cowboys and Chargers all needing maybe alpha backs here, but ends up going to the Panthers, which is interesting. Chuba Hubbard was a running back 3 last year, just finished outside at 26.5-point PPR. So that was your ceiling there. Miles Sanders was an absolute bust coming over from Philadelphia in free agency. So now they have Jonathon Brooks. He's coming off that torn ACL in November. He was the backup and understudy to Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. So he got his chance there, produced really well before that unfortunate injury. I think he can be a big asset in this backfield, but you can't be too enthused about this offense. The Panthers offense leaves a lot to be desired. They're still figuring it out. I think that's going to come into play with Xavier Legette, their first-round pick as well. We talked about that. There's some gaggle of receivers there. Well, we'll see how Brooks fights through. I mean, Sanders is probably done here. Remember, that was a Frank Reich previous edition with Scott Fitterer, so he's probably done. Wanted to have Dave Canales and Dan Morgan put their stamp on this team. So Brooks has a good chance to be the feature back at some point, but we don't know what that health timetable is, and it's a low upside kind of rushing attack. So I think he's going to be worthy. I wouldn't draft him higher than an RB4. That's what I'm looking at. Stash. I think he's the guy you would want. I wouldn't waste a pick on Hubbard, definitely not on Sanders early in the draft. Just don't do it. I think just invest in Brooks, put him on your bench if he's not quite ready. If they're not ready to unleash him as a workhorse, and then you can be patient. And then I think he's going to have a lot more value there with this offense in 2025 and beyond when he's fully healthy all season long. And maybe they turn the page a little bit offensively to make it a lot more efficient and effective in Carolina with Canales. All right, there's a look at those picks here. We'll get into 10 more. Yep, we had 10 offensive skill players in addition to these guys taking rounds 2 to 3. We'll get into them, but first we got to hear from a couple of our fine sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is getting toward the big time in May. FanDuel is your place to bet on every game in all the sports while we wait for the NFL to return. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? It's a good time to get in on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by the Game Time app. I'm always looking to go to last-minute concerts or sporting events. Life is busy, and I want to have an app that's going to take care of me and to find the best last-minute deals at the best prices, being there for the zone deals and flash deals, all the good stuff that they have on Game Time to make sure I'm getting the right tickets to the right events. And I'm always taking care of even at the last minute. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You might be trying to get to an NBA playoff game, MLB game, maybe an NHL game to see what you're looking at on FanDuel. Well, check it out. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the Locked On NFL code for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code Locked On NFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's continue looking at more picks here from day 2. We're going to transition from round 2 to round 3 in this segment. AD Adonai Mitchell, he was drafted 52nd overall, going back to wide receivers. So we had Coleman, McConkey, and Polk keep that streak up of wide receivers. And then with the running back interruption with Brooks, going back to Mitchell, another prospect out of Texas. He goes to the Colts. Right now, he's a good chance to displace Alec Pierce. Remember, he was drafted in the previous regime here as the outside guy that you're going to look at opposite Michael Pittman Jr. You also have Josh Downs, who's been a valuable slot. You have also a lot of tight ends here. So we'll see. But Mitchell would be seeming to be the perfect combination here with Anthony Richardson because he can stretch the field. He's got good size, speed here. So we want to watch it. I think you definitely draft him because Pierce is not that great, and they really need to find that reliable number 2 away from Pittman. Pierce can make some big plays, but he's only flash, where I think Mitchell can be a little bit more complete of a receiver. Again, Josh Downs has also had struggles to stay on the field here, so there's a lot to like about Mitchell. Again, I look at Mitchell and say, hey, this is a guy that maybe should have gone in the first round. I think there were some concerns about some off-field stuff. We know Chris Ballard, the GM of the Colts, defied that and defiantly said that he is a trusted guy that they can look at all over the field. So Mitchell really landed in a good spot. I wish Xavier Worthy was here, his teammate. I would have liked it a little bit more, but Mitchell being there with the Colts is someone we're definitely going to put on the radar as a draftable wide receiver in redraft. The next pick we're going to forget about, it is Ben Sinnott. He's a tight end from Kansas State. He went 53rd to the Commanders. He was the second tight end taking a draft behind Brock Bowers, going in the first round, 13th overall to the Raiders. So why they have Zach Ertz around, they have Austin Eckler. They just are looking at spreading the field a little bit more. They added Luke McCaffrey. We'll get into him as a potential slot there that you can put in between Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I think they're going to go back to getting the alphas involved here with Cliff Kingsbury, McLaurin, and Dotson for Jaden Daniels. So, and Ertz is on the field. Again, it could be a situation like the one that developed with Trey McBride where he had Ertz, and Ertz is going to dominate. Then there's a transition here. But with all that in play, I think Sinnott is a guy that we're looking for 2025. I guess you call him Senate as well, but Sinnott, Senate, however you say it, he's not a consideration for you in redraft and not a forced pick here in fantasy. There's just not too much athletic upside with him, so he could be valuable with some volume, but not as long as Ertz is around. And Eckler, keep in mind, is a very valuable short area receiver as well. Let's transition to round 3 here. The Jets took a slot that they'd had their eye on for a while to replace Randall Cobb. It is Malachi Corley. He was taken 65th overall, so they had some eye on this guy, and I think I knew he was going to go a little bit ahead, but I had ranked a little bit lower as a slot option here. But you can't ask for a better place than landing with Aaron Rodgers here. So looking at it, I mean, it's not bad at all for him there, but I think it's going to take some time to produce just because they have quite a few bodies here. I think maybe we forgot about some of the players that they have, but Mike Williams has been added. Xavier Gipson, remember him? He had a few flashes last year, so I like him as well of making some plays. And then you still have Al Lazard hanging around. You got a lot of dudes here just in the mix, and we know that Rodgers has a little soft spot for Lazard. So a lot of things to watch here as this pecking order plays out for the Jets. Keep in mind, Mike Williams is also coming off injury, but there's an opening there for Corley. Again, he's a better dynasty target than redraft for sure. I think 2025 is when you'll see it. But Garrett Wilson playing off him definitely gives favorable coverage for whoever can emerge as the number 2 with the Jets, if it's Williams there, or Corley. Williams has to stay on the field, and then you would think of Corley more as a bench stash late in your drafts if you're going there at all. Now, Trey Benson, I think the biggest thing you want to take with Trey Benson is he's going to the Cardinals, so they need a backup to James Conner, power backup. And this backfield is going to do pretty well. Conner's been very productive. He's been a solid RB2, finishing in the top 24 the last 2 seasons. Before he had been a scoring machine. He's really been very productive as a fantasy asset, not just for the Cardinals, but before with the Steelers. And even when we doubt him, he comes through. But this is maybe giving us a little bit more reason to doubt. I still would draft James Conner ahead of him, and I would target him as an RB2 here based on the volume. But I think you look at Keon Coleman, Imari DeMarcado, and all these guys that were on the roster trying to fill in, but Conner also has durability issues. We've seen that last year. Benson is a strong, powerful, between the tackles back with some juice. He can burst some big plays and get to the outside. So again, Benson is a guy that I'm looking more for 2025, taking over the job. They can move on from Conner. He's not re-signed there. So that really sets you up there. If you're looking dynasty, short term, again, he's a high-end handcuff for Conner, oft-injured player in Arizona. Then Jermaine Burton was a great pick, I think, by the Bengals at number 80. This is the last pick we'll talk about in this segment. He directly replaces Tyler Boyd as their slot option for sure. I mean, he's their best choice here. Trenton Irwin was not that type of receiver. For now, they've retained T. Higgins, didn't trade him opposite Jamar Chase. So developing that same situation you had in Joe Burrow's big volume year right away, where you have some wide receiver 3 upside if Burton can get enough targets here. When you look at Chase and Higgins, keep in mind that Tyler Boyd had 98 targets last year. A lot of it was tied to T. Higgins being hurt and not being out on the field, so they had to target him a lot behind Jamar Chase. You'd think that would correct itself, where Higgins would get the second most behind Chase, but then you would have an opportunity for Benson to get still 90 targets, potentially Burton, I should say. So Burton, when you look at him and say, hey, this guy's a lot like Tyler Boyd, I think he's better than Tyler Boyd. I think he has a little bit of big play upside. He can stretch the field a little bit in the middle of the field. Boyd had those moments as well, doing that for Burrow. I think he had underrated speed there, but Burton out of Alabama, very reliable here. So I do like this. And again, Benson and Burton, those are the last 2 picks here. So easy to get those names mixed up. But Benson to the Cardinals as a premium handcuff, and Burton as a slot we're going to watch carefully with the Bengals. So they do have quite a few vacated targets, but again, a lot of those tied to Boyd. They did try to make up for the tight end void. So I look at Burton again. If you see where Boyd's value was, a little bit less than a wide receiver 3, I think you draft Burton in some deeper leagues there. If you're in a 14-team league, you look at Burton, but I think you could have a bigger role at some point as kind of the number 2 out of the slot should they move on from T. Higgins in 2025. All right, we will get into the last few picks from rounds 2 and 3 in the third round of the 2024 NFL draft to see what we're doing there. But before we do that, we're going to hear from our title sponsor. All right, Monopoly Go is an amazing game. It's addictive and fantastic, and I can't say enough. You want to get into it. Game off. We got to pause to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in the game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to go, and I really can't get enough of it. And once you're into Monopoly Go, you will either unique stickers you can trade with friends to compete, albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. So remember those Monopoly boards you used to get there when he went to McDonald's. Well, you can play that here as well. So a lot of throwback fun with Monopoly Go. There's also hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. So a little bit of fun, a devious element as well, stealing and trash talking your friends. So a lot of good stuff there, just like fantasy football. I would say that you can get involved with your friends and have a lot of fun with them. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton, including their unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, let's look at the last few picks here in the second and third rounds of the 2024 NFL Draft, what they do for fantasy. We're in the third round. Blake Corum, a big running back name, goes at 83 overall. He goes to the Rams, however. This is not the best landing spot because they have elite fantasy football producer Kyren Williams. That said, Corum compares favorably to Kyren Williams. They saw a lot of him in Corum because of his smaller size, but tough running when needed, and then a little bit of burst on the outside. So Blake Corum doesn't have the same burst, I don't think, as Kyren Williams. But again, this would say this is your direct handcuff. And the Rams, we typically know at Sean McVay, are one back type of system. They load up that back and give him a lot of touches. So we saw that last year with Williams getting 22 touches per the games. He was healthy. He was healthy for 12 games, so he did miss 5 games there, especially in the middle of the season. So Corum is going to be a high-volume backup as soon as something would happen to Kyren Williams. Same thing with James Conner and Trey Benson. So very similar situations for both of those backs, kind of getting behind some guys that are kind of similarly built and have the same type of production. So definitely high-end handcuffs for sure. Benson and Corum are the ones you want to circle. Now, Roman Wilson, another Michigan Wolverines pick, went right after Corum at wide receiver, however, to the Steelers. So you had Jermaine Burton go in the division to the Bengals. Here you've got Roman Wilson with the Steelers. Now, they've got some vacated targets, but a lot of them are tied to Deontay Johnson and Allen Robinson. George Pickens is the alpha. You have George Pickens, and then you have Pat Freiermuth at tight end. You have Calvin Austin fighting for a role here. A lot of other dudes in the mix that they've put in there, including Denzel Mims. You got to dig deep here with the Steelers for their depth chart. And it's a very thin receiving core. Again, it should be a run-heavy type of offense here with the centerpieces being Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, who also are pretty involved in the passing game. And it's going to be different, though. We have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. You have Arthur Smith there calling the shots. So the way things could play out are different, but they drafted Wilson, Omar Khan, the GM did. Good pickup for him for this specific style of offense and this quarterback, Russell Wilson. So I do like Wilson potentially developing as a number 2. I'd say the opportunity is fantastic here. Great landing spot for that receiver. But again, we'll see how much volume can go his way. He's got to cut into a lot of what Johnson did last year. Austin also has to not be as big of a factor to really trust him, Wilson, that is, because, again, Austin coming off of injury as well. He could be a valuable slot for this team. So a lot of things to look at here for the Steelers, a wait-and-see approach here, but definitely a spot that you're going to be intrigued by. Roman Wilson, definitely worth a late-round pick in a lot of deeper redraft leagues, and someone you're excited about there, what he can do as a big playmaker in Dynasty starting in 2025. Now, Marshawn Lloyd, this was a tough landing spot here for him with the Packers because the Packers went out and got Josh Jacobs. They went and made sure that they got A.J. Dillon back as a backup as they moved on from Aaron Jones as he went to the division rival Vikings. So Lloyd is going to essentially replace Jones, but if with Dillon back and Josh Jacobs dominating touches, you're looking at a third string back here. Better receiving situation back than Dillon, so they needed to add a third guy here to kind of split. And that's what's going to happen here. If Jacobs is not available, has more injury attrition, then you're going to have a pretty much split situationally between Dillon, the more power back, and what they have here in Marshawn Lloyd. So you can't go there with a third string running back, but if they give up on Dillon next year or Jacob starts to break down, then you can start looking at Lloyd a little bit more in 2025. Jalen McMillan, not a good landing spot. The Buccaneers have the fewest, way low in terms of vacated targets, only 8. Yep, that's right. So there's not a lot of room to make up here, even with the Russell Gage not being available now. He's not on the team. Trey Palmer emerged with 3, but it was essentially 130 plus targets for each Mike Evans, I should say, and Chris Godwin. And you didn't have anything else except for Palmer making an occasional big play here. You also had Rashad White out of the backfield. So these are the main receivers there, along with Cade Otton at tight end. So when we're looking at it, I think McMillan, you can't look there at all. We'll have to see what they do with Mike Evans. He's turning 31 here, so we'll see if he can hold up much longer, but he just did a new contract extension. Chris Godwin also still not 30 here, so not much to see here with McMillan, not the best landing spot for him. I really liked him going into the draft, but this spot is just really bad. Again, we talk about talent and location, and they have to kind of line up here for these rookies to produce sooner rather than later, at least as second-year players. And Luke McCaffrey, interesting. I thought the Commanders reached a little bit at number 100 overall. This was the last pick in the third round, the last pick we'll talk about here on the show. So Luke has got some really good skills, but I would say it's a replacement for Curtis Samuel. We talked about how they have Eckler and Ertz, and that's what hurts Ben Sinnott there at tight end. So when you look at that, I mean, it's going to hurt your receiver here, McCaffrey, as well. So, and it's not going to be a Curtis Samuel-based offense where Samuel was a sleeper last year because Sam Howell was running for his life and couldn't get the ball downfield to his receivers. McDaniel, or I would say Jalen Daniels, is going to run a little bit more than Howell. We know that. Dedicated running. So maybe those checkdowns and the shorter passes are gone as well. So that McCaffrey type stuff here with Curtis Samuel filling in that role is going to be different, as well. A new offense here with Cliff Kingsbury. So I'm not feeling it a lot with Luke McCaffrey being a fantasy asset. I think you look at him as a stash, but again, you have Dotson and McLaurin standing his way. You have now Sinnott there behind Ertz. Eckler's going to eat up a lot of short area passes when Daniels is not running, and Eckler can dump it off and make his plays there. So, yeah, it's not a good landing spot for either Sinnott or McCaffrey. I'll say that. Again, this team, sneakily, the Commanders are pretty crowded at wide receiver and at running back right now in terms of catching passes. So, can look at a lot of short area stuff there. But we're definitely going to look at what these guys can do in the future, 2025. That's where your value is. But I would not take either Commanders skill position player from day 2 in fantasy. So there you have it. There's a breakdown of the 14 picks in the second and third rounds of the 2024 NFL Draft and fantasy football outlook, short and long term. On the next show, we hopefully will have Michelle back, and we'll break down some of the late round picks. This is where we found Puka Nacua and some real gems last year that could have some impact. And we're going to pick out some standout guys from rounds 4 through 7 to look at in fantasy as well. For this edition of Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. And as Michelle would say, bye, y'all.